viewers of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. Ecuadorians have voted to elect their local authorities and the Council for Citizen Participation and Social Control. In total, voters will elect almost 6,000 officials who will take office on May 14th. Polls close at 5 p.m. and vote counting is now underway.
Ask the new elected officials to work for each neighborhood, for the people. We hope they will work.
Our correspondent Denise Herrera is at the National Electoral Council here in Quito and joins us now live. Hi, Denise. Denise, how has the day gone, and when do you expect to see results?
Hello, yeah, indeed. We are at the National Electoral Council now, where recently the authorities just reported that they have registered the participation of the voters, and they said that they registered approximately 70% of the registered voters. They also say that in all voting centers among the country, people vote with normality, and they also said that they will count the votes in the following order: first, mayors; second, prefects; and third, councillors; and finally, the members of the Council for Citizen Participation and Social Control. It is expected for the final report with the final results at night. So we will see how the Ecuadorian people is voting today. All day was count day, so it is expected that around 5,000 officials or authorities will be elected today.
Okay, thank you so much, Denise. That is our correspondent, Denise Herrera, here in Quito. She's at the National Electoral Council. Today, over 13 million Ecuadorians were eligible to cast their ballots to elect mayors and other local officials from both rural and urban areas. Let's have a look at some of the key points. In total, there are 5,670 positions to be voted on. Among them, there are 23 prefects and deputy prefects of the provinces. Although there are 24 provinces in Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands have special provisions for elections. 221 mayors are being chosen. People were also electing 867 urban and 438 rural councillors, 4,089 members of parish councils, and 6 members of the Citizens Participation Council were also being elected. We are now joined here in studio by Fernando Casado. Thanks for joining us. Fernando is an author and an analyst with a PhD in social communication and a professor here in Quito. What is your overall impression of today's election? The CNE, which is the National Electoral Council here in Ecuador, and the spokesperson for the OAS, which is overseeing these elections, says that all is being carried out with normality. And how do you see the CNE as having overseeing these elections?
Hello, Camila. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, the day today has been in total normality, but I would say that there has been many irregularities during the whole process, like the Electoral Council has changed the rule in the last few days and weeks. Like, for example, there was an attempt to differentiate between a normal null ballot and the null ballot for the Council of Citizen Participation and Social Control. They wanted the null ballot, in case you voted for that option in this council, to count like 3 votes. And this is something a bit surrealistic, in the sense that you have never seen before in history that the null ballot counts 3 times instead of 1 time. And this is because from the government and also from some institutions, they are trying to promote this null ballot and trying to make it as big as possible, in the sense that this council that the government wanted to have it under its control now is not necessarily the result they will have. Probably the Correístas will get a very important ballot in these elections, in this institution, and that is frightening some of the institutions in Ecuador, like the Electoral Council, and that's why now, in order to try to close it down, what is not an option at the moment, or is not a constitutional option, that is why they would like to show like the null ballot is more than a normal ballot. So that is one of the things that have been very controversial in the last few days that the Electoral Council, for example, has tried to promote.
And can you tell us really quickly what has changed between the CNE now and the CNE just 2 years ago in the presidential elections?
Yeah, well, what has happened also is that actually this this institution that today the members has been voted, the Council of Citizens Participation and Social Control, has been changing the different posts in the different institutions in Ecuador. In Ecuador, we don't have 3 state branches like in other countries like executive, legislative and judiciary. We have 2 more branches that are the participatory citizens participation branch and also the electoral branch. And this transitional institution, that is the Council of Citizens Participation, has been changed most of the public offices in Ecuador. That is why this is a very important office and a very important institution that today has been decided, and they are afraid that perhaps now the Correístas will take over this institution. That's why this electoral office now in place is different than the one we had 2 years ago in Ecuador, because the member has been changed by the Transitional Council of Citizens Participation.
And getting back to why people are voting today, what are some of the issues that were key during this election campaigning? I asked this specifically because the local elections aren't particularly interesting to an international audience, but this one has been quite controversial.
Yeah, this one has been very controversial because the Electoral Council has tried to change some of the rules, but also because in a way this is also going to be a sort of a referendum to see if the Correísmo and ex-President Rafael Correa's forces are still alive and has strength or not. In a way, depending on the amount of city towns and councils that the Correístas will take over, we will be able to measure which is going to be the foreseen future in Ecuador. And we will see also if different forces take different actions in order to try to control politics in Ecuador. In a way, the presidency we have right now, that was supposed to be a continuation of Rafael Correa and right now is in the opposition of Rafael Correa, is a transitional government. And depending on the result of the elections, the local elections, one of the foreseeable scenarios is to have new presidential elections, because probably if the right-wing parties that lost last presidential elections think that they are strong enough, they will try to make the so-called cross-death in order to call for election of the executive and the legislative branches. So this is one of the scenarios. Another scenario is that if the Correístas take some of the main cities, that will also show to the rest of the political forces that the Correísmo has not been dismantled and that the Correísmo has a lot to do still. And then maybe they will try to take measures in order not to advance the presidential elections and trying to continue with the harassment of the Correísta, as it has been the case in the last 2 years. So I think that these local elections that are not very important from an international point of view, have many things that will be analyzed for the right-wing parties and also for the Correístas.
And we were saying that it's been reported that everything's being carried out with normality in terms of the voting today, but you were talking about some of the irregularities during the process. And another piece of news that came out as a surprise was that residents who've long been able to vote here in Ecuador were suddenly wiped from their voter registration and for the first time were unable to vote and participate today. And that may include you?
Yes, me and thousands of people in Ecuador, like some dozens of thousands of people. The thing is that I voted a couple of years ago in the first round, second round of the presidential elections, and also last year in the referendum that took place in February 2018. But then suddenly the Electoral Council decided that in order to be able to vote in Ecuador, you had to have the residence for 5 years and legal residence, and then make a formality before the registration in order to be able to vote. In my case, for example, I've been for more than 5 years legally resident in Ecuador, but suddenly I realized that I was not in the registration, electoral registration anymore, and I didn't have the chance in order to register myself for these elections. So this has been a complete regressive human rights policy because of a supposed formality. Thousands of people have been taking away a right, like is the right to ballot. So this is one of these irregularities that has taken place in this case. And some people also claim, because many foreigners have organized themselves in order to protest this measure, that foreigners that are identified with right-wing policies or right-wing parties has not been taken away this right. So if that is true, that is even more controversial, because then it's not that only foreigners in general has been taken away a right, a human right, and then regressive human rights policy has taken place, is that it has been also discriminatory.
And one final question. He's, of course, in Brussels now, but what role does former President Rafael Correa play in this election?
I think that he has played a very important role. First, he has polarized the local election. These elections that should not be much polarized. He has turned this election into also, again, a sort of national referendum about the Correísmo and about dividing the different candidates in left and right, representing Correa and his political party, the only leftist party at the moment in Ecuador. And also, I think that he has also forced the Electoral Council to provoke and to commit all these irregularities. Like now, it has been also discussed that the Correísta candidate could be punished because Correa had been doing electoral campaign for them, and then that would be an irregularity, and it has been even said that they might be punished, and that could be also the case if they win. So I also think that his role in this election has been given an importance that this Council of Participatory the Council of Participation didn't have the importance that now it has because of Correa's campaign. So I think that in a way he has changed this campaign from a local election to an issue of national importance.
Okay, thank you so much for your insightful analysis. We're speaking to Fernando Casado here in studio, who's joining us on today's Quito elections, or elections in Ecuador. Now on to other news. Telesur had the opportunity to speak with the Marxist geographer David Harvey during his visit here in Ecuador. Let's have a look.
The Marxist geographer David Harvey takes a walk through San Roque, one of Quito's biggest open markets. He's here in Ecuador to take part in the forum called Food Sovereignty and the Defense of Quito's Popular Markets.
But on the other hand, it's a very human kind of scale place. As opposed to, like I say, industrialized agriculture, which produces frequently a genetically modified product, which doesn't taste very good. And I have to say, for instance, in Ecuador, the fruit juices here are absolutely astonishing. I've never been in a place where the fruit juices are so good, you know, and you kind of go, well, they're not produced industrially. They're produced locally, and this is the kind of thing we want, and want much more of, and it's healthier, by the way, than drinking Coca-Cola or some highly sugared beverage.
Urban space like this has been at the heart of Harvey's decades of work as a distinguished professor of anthropology and geography at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He has played a central role in the development of modern geography as a discipline, but he's also recognised for his work on political economy. In Quito, we asked him about the return of neoliberalism in Latin America.
In fact, what you're seeing is a landscape which is representative of a very unequal kind of society, unequal kind of world. And I think in Latin America, the levels of inequality, which were always pretty high, have become much higher. Unfortunately, after a period of trying to change some of that through what was called the pink tide, we now have people like Bolsonaro and Macri and so on coming into power and going back to, well, okay, the rich need to get richer because they're not rich enough, and the poor should feed themselves because the reason they're poor is because they did not invest in their own education, that kind of rhetoric. So, in the way, when neoliberal policies came through in the 1980s, a lot of people felt it was legitimate, and a lot of people felt it was acceptable. Now they don't feel it's legitimate or acceptable, so it's actually imposed by main force. So it does not surprise me that Bolsonaro comes as the one who's going to preserve neoliberalism. It can't be preserved democratically by sort of centre-left or centre-right parties anymore. It needs an authoritarian government, and actually it's so interesting, all around the world we see these authoritarian governments arising, some of them pretty close to being neo-fascist.
For Professor Harvey, markets like this remain a space of resistance and a source of hope that even with the threat of force, Latin America's resurgent neoliberals will not have it all their own way. Alejandro Ponce, Telesur, Quito.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. This Sunday marks 43 years since the U.S.-backed military coup in Argentina, during which time about 30,000 people were arrested and disappeared. Large demonstrations took place today in the historic Plaza de Mayo under the slogan "Memory and Unity." People are remembering the period of state terrorism and vow to never again allow for a repeat of the gruesome crimes of the dictatorship, which resulted in tens of thousands of disappearances, as well as the assassination and torture of citizens. Marches are being led by the grandmothers and mothers of the Plaza de Mayo. And another march consisted of left parties and organizations like the Coordinator Against Police and Institutional Repression, all of which congregated outside of the National Congress before marching to the Plaza de Mayo. Argentines also protested the nation's current economic crisis, which has only grown worse under President Mauricio Macri's administration. Bolivia has marked the Day of the Sea. It's the day that the country lost its coastal territory in a war with Chile in the 19th century. President Evo Morales has said that the country will continue its fight to regain sea access and once again make a call to Chile to hold dialogue on the issue. However, in October, the International Court of Justice at The Hague ruled that Chile was not obligated to discuss maritime access.
Regaining an access to sea will be achieving a second independence because of the development, the international trade, and the worldwide maritime projection of Bolivia. So today, March 23rd, the international community should know that as long as there is a Bolivian, we will never give up to try to return to the sea.
Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of the Chilean Cardinal Ricardo Izazdi, who agreed to step down after allegedly covering up sexual abuse cases. This is the 7th resignation Pope Francis has accepted from a senior Chilean church official. Izazdi has been accused of covering up several cases of sexual abuse, including that of the former chancellor of the diocese, who is accused of raping 5 children. A large fire has destroyed a favela in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo on the eve of the forced eviction of some 200 people living there. Fortunately, no one was hurt in that fire, which engulfed the entire settlement of wooden shacks. Some 200 people, including almost 70 children, were living in the cement favela since 2013, which was named after an abandoned cement factory nearby. The Sao Paulo City Hall had ordered the eviction due to precarious living conditions. Experts in Brazil still don't know the extent of pollution in rivers 2 months after a dam belonging to the Vale mining burst. Water is still reddish-brown in many rivers in the state of Minas Gerais. This despite the analysis conducted by the government and the mining company, which showed low toxicity levels. But an environmental group says that their water quality analysis shows high levels of toxic waste in key waterways.
The tailings of the dam, even though some have been retained further down, are still slowly passing through down to here in Felixandre, more than 200 kilometers away from where the dam broke, and is impacting the ecosystem directly.
On Saturday, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, spoke to media in Bridgetown, Barbados. He made it clear that the leaders who met with the U.S. president cannot speak for CARICOM and said that CARICOM has already taken a stance on Venezuela, which is non-intervention and non-interference. He also warned of efforts to divide CARICOM.
It emphasized the principles of non-intervention and non-interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela. That you must not, no country must threaten the use of force. Is contrary to the Charter of the United Nations also, and to international law generally. That CARICOM reaffirmed its commitment to the values of democracy and human rights. And that we believe that we could contribute towards a resolution of the problems in Venezuela by having a position whereby we will have conversations with all contending forces that might end up with an election, a referendum, or any other agreed mechanism under the Constitution.
Cyclone Idai's death toll has risen to more than 750 in the 3 southern African countries hit by the storm. Authorities in Mozambique are warning that the death toll is expected to rise as floodwaters recede and more bodies are discovered. Rescuers have been digging through the rubble to search for victims, while authorities are working around the clock to restore electricity and basic services to avoid outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Meanwhile, Mozambique's environment minister has said that his government is setting up a cholera treatment center for any possible outbreak of the disease.
We'll have cholera for sure. I was explaining in Portuguese that we'll have cholera, we'll have malaria. It's unavoidable in this situation. So the government is opening a cholera treatment center already, and we have teams on the ground.
Voters in the Indian Ocean island nation of Comoros have gone to the polls to choose a new president. Opinion polls indicate a landslide victory for incumbent president Azali Assoumani. Over 300,000 people are registered to vote. The nation has suffered more than 20 coups since it gained independence from France in 1975.
I take the international community as a witness. I tell them that I have already contacted the Election Commission yesterday to tell them that my delegates were prevented from entering the polling stations, despite the Charter of Good Conduct that we signed on 19th February. I withdraw my signature and will never recognize results from the polling stations in Anjouan, because what happened in Anjouan is a farce.
Algerian diaspora living in France has demonstrated to demand a change of government in their country. Hundreds of Algerians gathered at the Plaza de la République in Paris to urge President Bouteflika to resign. Waving their flag, protesters said that a political economic mafia controls Bouteflika's government. Gunmen have killed at least 134 people in central Mali. Fulani herds were targeted in the deadliest attack in recent times in the region, fueled by ethnic and jihadist violence. Security sources say among the victims are pregnant women, children, and elderly people. The assault on 2 villages has taken place as UN Security Council mission is visiting the country. Mexico's voladores, or flying dancers, are keeping a more than 4,000-year-old ritual alive. The dance originates from the Totonac people and was originally a ritual for asking the gods for rain and fertility. 4 of the dancers represent the 4 cardinal points as they fly upside down. Meanwhile, the 5th dancer, who represents the center, balances at the 30-meter pole and plays music.
That's why this school was born officially from 2004 to 2005. Young people come to help to try to teach these ceremonies performed by our ancestors, the grandparents without roots.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusarenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.